The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has announced plans to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, or rather, the Prime Minister announced that, and Rachel Reeves has now said that she's going to find that money, with ambitions to reach 3% in the next Parliament. This is something that Reform UK proposed long ago, that the Conservatives have proposed more recently, that any sensible person should have been proposing in the light of the international crisis that is unfolding. However, rather than raising taxes to fund this commitment, the government has opted for an efficiency saving, a phrase that is as nebulous as it is misleading. In reality, this is a familiar refrain, recycled austerity measures under a different name. And the government is living on the never-never, funding long-term commitments with short-term cuts rather than tackling structural economic issues. To finance this boost in defence spending, Reeves has ruled out tax increases, instead pointing to spending reductions. The first target, welfare. Cuts to sickness and disability benefits are being lined up under the pretext of addressing the so-called worklessness crisis. Yet history tells us that squeezing the most vulnerable rarely results in substantial savings. Pushing claimants off benefits without addressing the underlying causes of their conditions merely shifts costs elsewhere onto an already overburdened NHS, social services, and even the criminal justice system. This is austerity masquerading as fiscal prudence. The government has convinced itself that it can fund billions in additional defence spending by trimming the fat from public services. That's a Tory idea. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. The problem, the last decade, has already seen repeated rounds of belt tightening, leaving little left to cut without harming essential services. The only place where serious savings could be made, bloated bureaucracy, remains largely untouched and, if anything, is increasing. NHS England continues to advertise high-paying equality, diversity and inclusion roles while frontline staff struggle under impossible workloads. We see reports of EDI officers earning upwards of $120,000 a year, far exceeding the salaries of junior doctors and specialist nurses who are actually doing some work. While ensuring workplace inclusivity is important, it's difficult to justify such expenditures when NHS waiting lists exceed 7.5 million and hospitals are collapsing under financial strain. Bureaucracy, particularly in public health and welfare, has become an end in itself. Countless administrators, compliance officers and middle managers exist not to provide services but to justify their own existence, writing reports, commissioning reviews, creating work that in turn demands yet more administrators to oversee. Unless the government is willing to take on this self-perpetuating machine, any claims of efficiency savings are meaningless. And if the government is serious about increasing defence spending while avoiding further tax rises, it must cut from areas where real savings can be made, namely the layers of bureaucracy choking the NHS, the civil service and various arm's-length bodies. Targeting individuals who may or may not be incorrectly claiming benefits is a drop in the ocean compared to the millions wasted on redundant administrative roles. And even then, there's a limit to how much can be scrimped and saved. Defence spending requires long-term investment, particularly if Britain wants to build its own industrial capacity for arms production rather than relying on imports. And trimming a few million from Whitehall's administrative budgets won't suddenly conjure the billions needed to sustain an ambitious military expansion. The economic rationale behind this plan is fundamentally flawed. Reeves claims that boosting defence spending will fire up Britain's industrial base and create jobs, but it's true. It's true in some way if there were investment in the first place, but getting that investment, you can't get it on nothing. If the government truly wants to invest in Britain's defence capabilities, while maintaining economic stability, it must consider more sustainable options, whether that means targeted tax increases, windfall levies on excess corporate profits, or restructuring procurement processes to cut out waste and inefficiency in defence contracts, or whether it means wiping out lots of bureaucratic rubbish. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the French are debating wealth taxes to fund their own military expansion. The contrast is stark. While Britain clings to the illusion that efficiencies can cover the cost, France is openly acknowledging that security comes with a price tag, and one that must be paid by those who can afford it. I'm not suggesting that, by the way. I'm suggesting you get rid of the bureaucratic rubbish. What we are witnessing is not a clear, thought-out financial strategy, but a recycled Conservative-era tactic dressed up in Labour rhetoric. And the government is relying on an already overburdened public sector to foot the bill for increased defence spending rather than addressing the fundamental inefficiencies that plague British governance. What is extraordinary is since this party came into power, there has been an explosion in pointless bureaucratic jobs in the NHS. Why? Why? If Reeves and Starmer are serious about balancing the books while strengthening national security, they must be willing to take on the sacred cow of bureaucratic excess rather than once again placing the burden on those least able to bear it.